Hey, welcome to Saved and Besieged by Flippin' Tables. This is a place where faith meets the fight, and your permission to be brutally honest about your pain without letting go of Jesus. This is a space for the burned, the bruised, and the barely hanging on. No sugarcoating, no shallow faith, just raw hope, real theology, and a God who refuses to walk out when life gets ugly. Saved and Besieged by Flippin' Tables, for the wrecked, the raw, and the rising. Hey, this is Cece.
And I'm JR.
Together we're JRCC. Our mission is simple, to bring you one podcast at a time about faith.
Not the polished, sugar-coated version, but real faith.
The kind that wrestles doubts, cries out, and still finds Jesus in the mess.
That's what Saved and Besieged is all about.
Welcome to Saved and Besieged with JRCC. Today we're going to start it slightly differently. We're going to start reading Luke chapter 5. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw the water's edge 2 boats, left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." Let's get into it. The waters were still, like a mirror reflecting the soft hues of the early morning sky. The horizon was barely a line, and the sea stretched out before Peter like a blank canvas. He sat at the edge of the boat, exhausted. His body ached from a night of futile work. The sea had given him nothing but frustration. The fish weren't biting, not a single catch after hours of casting nets and pulling them back empty. It had been a long night, and Simon's soul felt just as empty as the nets he kept pulling in. He was just about ready to call it quits and go home. But the crowds were already gathering along the shore, pressing in, listening to Jesus, the one who was rumored to heal the sick, raise the dead, and speak with wisdom, that even the most learned were left speechless. Peter had heard the stories, but he wasn't sure that he believed them. After all, he was just a fisherman. So what did he have in common with a man like that? And despite his exhaustion, Simon, Peter, couldn't help but notice the crowd was drawn to him. People came from all over to listen to Jesus speak. And as if the scene had just been waiting for this moment, Jesus walked towards Peter, and the crowd followed him. And without anything, Jesus stepped into Peter's boat. The waters were calm, but the atmosphere was thick with something electric. And the presence of Jesus seemed to draw everything into focus. And Peter's heart probably raced, not because of fear, but because something in the air had changed. This wasn't just another ordinary day. He wasn't just another teacher or healer. He was here for another reason. But Peter didn't know any of that yet. All he knew was that Jesus was standing in his boat. And Peter didn't realize that his life was about to change forever. Let's really break this down. Jesus didn't need Peter's boat. He could walk on water, as he would later show. He didn't need anything Peter had to offer. But Jesus wasn't interested in the boat alone. He was interested in Simon Peter. This is a crucial distinction. Jesus could have stood on the shore and taught the people without the boat. He could have done anything. But he chose to step into Peter's life, into his world, into his personal space. Why? Because Jesus didn't come just to perform miracles or heal people. He came for people. He came to invite them into something bigger. Now, Simon was tired, he was frustrated, he was worn out. And just like you've got to realize Jesus doesn't need your boat. He wants you, your limitations, your frustrations, your weariness, because none of that disqualifies you. And when Jesus steps into your life, it's not because you're perfect, but because he sees something in you that you don't even see in yourself yet. He sees your potential. He knows who you can become. Because at that moment, Simon Peter was nothing more than a fisherman. His boat represented more than a vessel, though. It was his livelihood, his routine, his way of life. It was everything he knew. And Jesus didn't just step into his boat to perform a miracle. He stepped into Peter's life knowing the flaws, the doubts, the future mistakes, the future denials. He knew all of it, and he still chose Peter. He wasn't concerned with what Peter was at the moment. He only cared about what Peter would become. And Peter was probably still unsure of the significance, but still obeyed when Jesus asked him to push the boat out. And as Jesus finished teaching, he told Peter to launch out into deep waters and let his nets down for a catch. Simon Peter, probably tired and disappointed, looked at Jesus and said, Master, we worked all day and night. We worked really hard, haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. This wasn't a statement of faith. It was a statement of resignation. Fine, I'll do it, but I don't expect much. Peter was still acting as Simon, uncertain, self-doubting, aware of his limits. And then the miracle happened. The nets began to fill with fish, so much that they began to break. Peter fell to his knees, overwhelmed. His tiredness, doubts, and self-awareness of how little he could accomplish on his own were all shattered by the reality of who Jesus was. And in that moment, Simon realized something. Jesus saw him differently than he saw himself. But he fell to his knees in awe, saying, Go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. The weight of his inadequacy, his unworthiness, flooded his heart. But Jesus saw Peter's heart, and he didn't reject him. He didn't scold him. Instead, he said, Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. And this is the crux of everything. This is where the Simon-Peter tension begins to unfold. In that moment, Peter was still Simon, uncertain, self-doubting, and aware. But Jesus didn't call him Simon. He called him Peter, the rock on which he would build his church. So stay tuned as we break this down further. Tension between Simon and Peter. Even when faith feels fragile, God hasn't walked out. You're listening to Saved and Besieged. Let's keep walking together. Welcome back. You're listening to Saved and Besieged with JRCC. Peter was temporarily Simon, but Jesus already saw the Peter in him, the leader, the one who would step into his purpose, and the one who would rise above his flaws and become a pillar of the early church. The name Jesus gave Peter, the rock, was prophetic. It wasn't based on what Peter was at that moment, but on who he would become. Jesus didn't see Peter in terms of his failures or his limitations. He saw the potential for greatness. And Jesus wasn't interested in waiting until Peter had everything together. He was calling Peter out of Simon's shadow. And Jesus sees you differently than you see yourself. And just like Peter, we often get caught in self-doubt, fear, and insecurity. We only look at our flaws, our mistakes, our history, and think that God could never use us, never choose us, never call us. But God doesn't see your flaws. He sees your potential. He sees what He created you to be, not who you are right now. And it's so easy to believe that Jesus only calls the perfect ones, the ones who have it all together, and the ones who don't doubt. And that's the ridiculous bit, because we see that in Christianity all the time. Once you've met Jesus, you've got to get your life together. But we have examples of Jesus' disciples who never had it together. They were flawed right until the end. But Jesus doesn't care about any of that. He calls those who are willing, those who are open to His invitation. He doesn't wait for us to be perfect. He meets us where we are, calls us by our name and says, I don't care about your limitations. I care about you. So as Jesus steps into your life, remember, He doesn't need your boat, your skills, or your perfection. He wants you. There's a huge difference. He wants your doubts, your weaknesses, your scars, because those are the very things He will use. He steps into your world not to perform a miracle just for you, but to invite you into something bigger than yourself. And the journey isn't about your boat. It's about your willingness to step out in faith, to follow Jesus even when you fully don't understand. And when you do, you'll realize the boat, the thing that once seemed like your whole world, is just a stepping stone into something far greater. So stay tuned as we break this down further and go deeper into Simon and Peter. You're not too broken and you're not too far gone for God to stay. Even in the darkest night, He's still there, waiting and listening out for you. This is Saved and Besieged. Let's keep moving into the next part. Welcome back to Saved and Besieged with JRCC. We're talking about the tension between Simon and Peter. And the feeling of being stuck is something that many of us know all too well. It's a space between who you were and who you're becoming. A space filled with doubt, fear, uncertainty. And when you've been walking down a path and suddenly you hit a wall, not a literal one, but a mental and emotional wall. A wall that makes you question your worth, your purpose. And that's the tension Simon faces. It's like when you're playing the game of Simon Says, right? You know the rules. You're supposed to do whatever Simon says. But the second you act without hearing the command, you're out. And the whole time you're running through the motions, trying to do what you're told. And then you mess up. You didn't hear Simon properly or you moved too quickly and suddenly you're out of the game. You're left wondering how you got stuck in a moment when you were sure you were moving forward. And it turns out you were misdirected by your own perception. That's Simon's life, and in many ways, our lives too. Simon says, flip off someone in traffic, and we do it. Simon says, yell at your kids, and we do it. Peter, or rather Simon as he's called in this moment, has already been chosen, but he's still playing Simon Says. He's seen the miracle of the fish. He's heard Jesus call him to be Peter. The promise is right in front of him. But Simon can't shake off the old limitations. Aren't we stuck in that too? The doubts, the fears, the voice that tells us this is all who you are. And how often we get caught in a cycle of self-limiting beliefs. That's just how I am mentality. How many times have you heard yourself say something like, I've always been this way, so I'll never change. Or I'm not that person. I'm not capable of doing that. Or being that. And we've all carried those thoughts, beliefs that keep us in a space of comfort and predictability. Even when God is calling us forward, Simon doesn't think he can be the man Jesus calls him. And this is where self-awareness can be limiting. Yes, self-awareness is a great thing, but we're so aware of our flaws and weaknesses. And then we're fixated on our limitations that we can't imagine a life beyond them. We've seen the same pattern in ourselves 100 times. We get caught in the who we are now moment. That's just who I am moment. And I'm just doing me, so I'm going to do me. Sorry. Self-awareness is good, but Christ awareness is transformative. That is what we need. Simon knew what he had been, but Jesus saw what he could become. Jesus called Simon not by his faults, but by his potential. He didn't call him the fisherman or the impulsive one, but he called him Peter, the rock. And he didn't just call him to step out of his limitations. He called him to step out into a higher calling that even Simon couldn't even begin to fathom at that point. Think about the moment when Peter was in the boat with the other disciples after Jesus had walked on water. Jesus called out to him saying, come walk with me. But Peter hesitated. And it wasn't the first time he hesitated because his doubt overtook him. He had faith, but his doubts were louder. And in that moment, he was stuck. He couldn't step out into the fullness of his calling. And yet, here's the interesting part. Jesus doesn't yell at him or scream at him because he fell, because he looked at his circumstances, or because he looked at his doubts. He reached down and he picked him up as he was drowning. That's the key. Because doubt is normal. Doubt is a passenger, not a driver. And I think the most important thing is to look at Jesus the way he was and the way he is right now. It's starting with love. And though Peter's life was full of doubts, Jesus didn't call him to perfection. He just called him to trust. Peter didn't always have the answers. He tried to. Sometimes his faith faltered, but Jesus never abandoned him. And Peter's transformation didn't happen overnight. He was still very much Simon. And sometimes the old man comes out, doesn't he? We're taught often that when you get saved and when you become a Christian, you're a new creature. Yes, your soul is. Your soul is with Jesus, but you've still got to battle your old man because you can get saved, raise your hands, get baptized and everything. But what happens when the rush of the church dies out? What happens on the Monday when you have the same feelings, the same thoughts, and you go back to the same habits? That is the tension we all have. And the key is to remember, Jesus doesn't really care about that. What he cares about is you, your heart, and the fact that you can still keep trusting him. Because God doesn't call us based on what we've done. He calls us based on who we can become through him. And it's so easy for us to be caught in that tension, to get caught in the past, stuck in our mistakes, stuck in the labels. And we look at ourselves and we think this is it. But he calls us beyond our past failures. And you're not stuck because you've started over too many times. You're probably stuck because you've stopped believing in the promise of what God has called you to be. We've limited ourselves by our failure. But you got to remember, if you feel like Simon today, Jesus already sees the Peter in you. He sees your potential, your future, not your imperfections or your past mistakes. The challenge is in accepting that calling and stepping beyond your doubts and refusing to let the Simon in you keep you from becoming the Peter that you were meant to be. Labels, lies, and our flesh, all the things we've told about ourselves, people have said to us, they don't have the final say. Because Simon's name means shifting sand. But in Christ, that's not our label. We're not defined by our labels. You and I are defined by God's calling on us. So as you step forward in faith, let go of the Simon inside you. And as long as you keep moving, keep believing, and stepping out in faith, the promise will come. The transformation will begin, just like it did for Peter. So stay tuned as we move on to the next bit, the sifting and the process of it. Take a breath. You're listening to Saved and Besieged by Flipping Tables. For the wrecked, the raw, and the rising. Let's step into the next part together. Welcome back. You're listening to Saved and Besieged with JRCC. Now there are moments in our lives when we're tested in ways we never expected. We face situations that bring everything we've built, everything we believe, to the surface, sometimes crumbling down. It's during these moments that the things we thought we knew about ourselves, our strengths, our weaknesses, identities, are revealed in ways we can't hide from. That sifting is a process of exposure. It's never easy. It's painful, messy, and it feels like it's too much to handle. But here's the truth. The sifting isn't the end. It's the beginning. Peter's story is a mirror for all of us, showing that even those who are chosen, who walk with Jesus, can face moments of doubt, weaknesses, and failure. We see Peter, who was so full of bold declarations about his loyalty to Jesus. Yet when the moment of trial came, he failed. He denied Jesus 3 times. That failure was the sifting. For us, the sifting might not look the same, but it can feel just as real. It's that moment when your confidence falters. It's the job you lost after pouring your heart into it for years. It's the relationship that fails despite your best efforts. And you wonder, how did I get here? Am I even the person I thought I was? Because you can feel like you're sinking and your identity can feel shaken. This tension between who we are and who we were meant to be is where many of us find ourselves. Think about a time when you set out to accomplish something meaningful, a career goal, a relationship, a personal dreams. And the doubts crept in. You began questioning your own ability, your own worth. Can I really do this? Do I have what it takes? And this is exactly the kind of struggle that Peter faced when he was told he would be sifted. He was not just failing in that moment. He was struggling with the tension of his present self, Simon, who he had always known, and the future version of himself, Peter. It's normal for us to wrestle with who you are and who you were meant to be. The key isn't to pretend it doesn't exist. It's to bring it to God. It's like trying to run a race, but constantly looking over your shoulder. You want to move forward, but your past, your failures, and your insecurities keep pulling your eyes back. And the key, again, is not to deny that struggle. It's to bring it to God. I think about a real-life situation that we can all relate to. A time when you wanted to accomplish something and you felt the weight of failure on your shoulders. The feeling of maybe you're going to fail again, or I failed before in something similar. It's the sifting moment. And here's the thing. God understands that struggle. He doesn't look at you and see failure. He sees potential. He sees the person you're becoming and not just the person you're right now. So stay tuned as we move on to the next part. Ever questioned if God still hears you? You're not alone. This is Saved and Besieged with JRCC. Let's get back into it. Welcome back. You're listening to Saved and Besieged with JRCC. Now, what makes Peter's story so powerful is that despite his failure, Jesus prayed for him. He knew what was ahead for Peter. He knew he would deny him, but instead of condemning him in advance, saying, oh, you're going to fail, you're out, Jesus prayed. Luke chapter 22, verse 32. I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. Peter's failure wasn't about being unworthy or about Jesus rejecting him. It was about Peter becoming who he was meant to be and the process of it. And Jesus' prayer for Peter's faith to survive the trial. Because the trial is not the end of the story. It's the preparation. And the same for us. When we're facing the sifting, when you feel the weight of your failures, Jesus is praying for you, not waiting for perfection. You see, the sifting process reveals what's real. It exposes the parts of us that need to be refined, strengthened, and purified. Peter's failure revealed that, despite his boldness, he still had areas of weakness. And that's okay. We were never created to be perfect. We were meant to be refined through it. Think about the process of refining gold. Gold doesn't stay gold because it's shiny on the surface. It's gold on the inside. It's pure. It has to go through a process of being heated to a high temperature, so all the impurities are burned away and come up. The heat reveals what's real. The gold remains, but the impurities are gone. And that's what sifting does. It reveals what's real in us. The doubts, the fears, the weaknesses, the wrong motives, they come to the surface, but they don't define us. They refine us. Survival through the sifting doesn't mean coming out unchanged. It means coming out stronger. And when Peter came out through the sifting, he wasn't the same man who denied Jesus. He was a man who had faced his weaknesses and survived. When he stood up at Pentecost, all the way in Acts chapter 1 and 2, preaching to thousands, the man who once sank in doubt was now standing strong in faith. Because it's the same for you and me. The failure, the struggle, the disappointment, they don't define you. They're part of your growth. Because the future you is already inside of you. It's just like Peter was already in Simon. The person you're becoming, the person God created, the person He called you to be is already inside you, even when you don't see it. Even when you're in the middle of your failure, the future you is being drawn out because you've got a new you inside you, the one that God knew, just as Peter's future as a bold preacher was already inside him when he denied Jesus. The future version of you, you may not see it right now, but as you survive the sifting, when you endure the trials, when you are refined, you will reemerge stronger and more confident. And it's a strange thing sitting by a fire on a cold night. The warmth from the flames can feel like comfort, a safe space. But in the case of Peter, that fire became a symbol of his deepest failure. Because as the embers flickered in front of him, Peter, the bold fisherman who had walked on water, declared his unwavering loyalty to Jesus, found himself sitting in the shadows of his own denial. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He had promised just hours earlier that he would follow Jesus to prison and even to death. He said he would never deny him, and yet here he was by the fire, surrounded by strangers, having denied Jesus 3 times. The very person whom he had followed for years, the one who had performed miracles, the one he had walked beside. And now in his moment of need, in Jesus' time of crucifixion, Peter had denied him. It wasn't because Peter didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah. It wasn't because his faith had wavered. It wasn't disbelief. It was fear. Fear of what would happen to him. Fear of what people would think. Fear of the consequences of standing by Jesus when the storm was at its peak. Peter's denial was not an outright rejection of Jesus' divinity. It was a moment of weakness. A moment when he couldn't reconcile his faith with his fear. And again, that's okay because we often find ourselves in it. We know what God's called us to do. We know what's been promised and we believe in His power. But when we face the heat of our own trials, the pressure of expectations, the fear of rejection, we find ourselves denying His call and denying His purpose. And here's the beautiful truth. Denial is not the end. It's not where our story stops. And it's not what God cares about because He cares about your heart. Failure is part of the process, but it's not your identity. And Jesus sees Peter in us even when we're sitting in Simon's shame. He sees the person we're becoming. Jesus wasn't surprised by Peter's denial. He didn't go, oh my goodness, I can't believe he did that. He knew his weakness. He knew it. He also knew that Peter's weakness would make him stronger in the end. And your failures don't disqualify you from your purpose. They're often the very tools God uses to shape you into whom He's called you to be. Because when we fall short, when we mess up, when we deny our calling, you will still find purpose in our pain. And God doesn't just leave you by the fire, and He doesn't just leave you in your failure. Because spiritual growth doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. Peter's growth didn't happen in an instant. It came through failure, through doubt, but through Jesus' grace. And this is what we need to understand. It's not about being perfect. It's about becoming. It's about becoming the person God created you to be, despite your imperfections. It's not always what we disbelieve. Sometimes we can't reconcile our fear with God's purpose. We fear we're not ready. We fear that we can't carry out His will. We fear someone else is better than us, more holy than us, more spiritual than us. We doubt our worthiness, our ability, our potential. So we step back, we hide. We deny that God has chosen us to carry out the work He's called us to do. Peter wasn't the only one to struggle with this tension. We all do. Every time we choose comfort over calling, faith over fear, or avoidance over action, we're denying the purpose that God has placed in our lives. As Peter sat there in the cold night by the fire, he must have felt the weight of his failure. But what happened next changed everything. Jesus, who had just been crucified, had died, had resurrected, went straight to the beach to find Peter because he knew where he was. He knew his nature. He knew Peter still had Simon in him. And Jesus, knowing what Peter had done, looked at him. The look Jesus gave Peter wasn't filled with condemnation, wasn't filled with anger, wasn't filled with disappointment. It was filled with vision. Imagine that moment. Peter's eyes meet Jesus, and in that look, Jesus didn't see Peter's failure. He saw Peter, the leader who would one day stand before thousands, the man who would boldly declare the gospel despite his past mistakes, the man who would preach with fire and conviction on the day of Pentecost, leading people to the faith that he had so boldly denied in the moment. Jesus sees the Peter in us, even when we're sitting in Simon's shame. That look that Jesus gave Peter, the look of no condemnation, the look of deep love and vision, Jesus wasn't judging Peter for his failure. He was looking at the man he was destined to become. And that same look is extended to us every time we fail, every time we fall short. God doesn't look at our moments of failure and sees someone who's lost, unworthy, or worthless. He sees who we're becoming. Peter was Simon in the moment, full of shame, regret, questioning his calling, doubting his worth. But Jesus saw the leader in him. Jesus didn't call Peter out of his failure. He called him through his failure. And that's what he does for us. He doesn't leave us in our mistakes. He calls us forward into what we can become through him. Peter's journey was a process of spiritual growth. From the fire of his failure, he would rise. From the shame of his denial, he would step into his purpose. And there, Jesus was, every step of the way, calling Peter forward, calling him to rise up. The call to rise up is the call to step into your true identity, to leave behind the doubts, the shame, the fear, and everything that's held you back. Peter's posture by the fire was one of defeat. He was hunched over, defeated. But Jesus' call was for him to rise up, from Simon's posture to Peter's authority. This is the transformation that God is calling you to. It's time to stand up, leave behind the identity of the person who failed, who stumbled, and step into who you were meant to be. Because God's not calling you to stay in your shame. Your mistakes don't define you. Your failure is not the end. You are called to rise, just as Peter was called to rise and to walk in the authority and purpose God has for you. And that's a wrap for this week's episode of Saved and Besieged by Flippin' Tables. Stay tuned. Next week, we'll dive even deeper into the trenches with a conversation you won't want to miss. We'll talk about the battles no one sees, the prayers that feel like they bounce off the ceiling, and why God's still in it with you, even when you're ready to tap out.
In the meantime, if you want to go even further, check out our books on faith, addiction and survival at flippintables.co.nz. They're raw, real and written for the wrecked, the raw and the rising.
Until then, keep fighting, keep trusting, and remember, Jesus never walks out when life gets ugly.